Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Wong, and I am the manager of the Communications and Issues Management team at the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I will be today's MC. I welcome you all to today's press conference for the release of the Commission's action plan, Dreams Delayed, Addressing Systemic Anti-Black Racism and Discrimination in Ontario's Public Education System. Today's media conference will discuss the making of the action plan and the recommendations alongside me to take us through the action plan are Chief Commissioner Patricia Daguerre, our Executive Director Michael Harris, Dr. Grace Camille Director, Black Scholarship Institute, the Faculty of Community Service at Toronto Metropolitan Faculty of Community Service. Once remarks are over, we will take questions. It will be one question and one follow-up. We will start with in-person questions, then move to online. We will also have instant translation for any questions asked in French. I will now turn it over to the Chief Commissioner.
A jolly good morning, everyone.
Bonjour à tout le monde.
A jolly good morning, everyone.
Thank
you so much, Lee,
for
that warm introduction. Thank you so much, Lee, for that warm Thank you for joining us.
Merci
for the release of Dreams Delayed.
Thank you for joining us.
The Ontario Human Rights Action Plan addresses the Ontario Human Rights Action Anti-Black Racism in Ontario's anti-black racism system. In Ontario's public education system. I think I'm going to have to be coaching my mouse today.
Je crois que je vais utiliser ma souris aujourd'hui.
Before proceeding, though, I shall begin with a personalized land acknowledgement.
Avant de commencer, je voudrais commencer.
As agent of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, I begin by acknowledging that today's what is now known and the Commission's office are located in so we are all guests on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississauga on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississauga. I recognize that this land is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Wendat people. I'm mindful that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. I'm mindful the Williams Treaty is covered by Treaty and the dish 13. With the one the Williams spoon Treaty wampum. And the dish with the one spoon wampum. And I acknowledge that Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations It is important to acknowledge the land. Until my extensive studies in Indigenous rights and land claims, I did not hear about the traditional names of territories. Indigenous peoples and all the struggles they faced were spoken about in the past tense. It is easy to deny Indigenous peoples of their rights if we historicize their struggles and simply pretend they do not exist. And so as a displaced person of the African diaspora, I take these opportunities to commit my efforts to address the struggles and systemic oppression which have dispossessed Indigenous people of their land and denied their rights to self-determination. And this is work that is essential around the world. So I'm grateful to the Indigenous people who continue to care for the land across Turtle Island. One week ago, we marked over 3 decades of Canada recognizing the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The Ontario Human Rights Commission acknowledges the global call to be resolute in our commitment to eradicate racism and all forms of discrimination and related forms of intolerance. For decades, Black communities and organizations have been calling attention to racism and discrimination in education across Canada. Within Ontario's education system, racial discrimination and harassment continue to cast a shadow over the lives of Black children, youth, educators, and education workers. Laws, policies, and practices which perpetrate prejudice, bias, beliefs, and stereotypes have been embedded in Ontario's education system. Today, The Commission calls on all duty holders in Ontario's education system to perform their responsibility and legal duties under the Ontario Human Rights Code to improve outcomes for Black students, Black educators, so they can learn and teach in school environments free from discrimination and harassment. It is part of our commitment to addressing systemic anti-Black racism and discrimination in Ontario's public education system. Whether it is overt racism or as subtle as microaggression, we know that racism and discrimination is traumatic, extremely painful, and destructive. Pernicious and tenacious systemic anti-Black racism and discrimination have required Black parents, young people, community groups, educators, and other organizations to challenge policies and practices which create barriers in students' daily lives. Systemic barriers which often delay, defer, or disrupt the dreams of Black learners. The Dream Delayed Action Plan that the Ontario Human Rights Commission is releasing today provides a blueprint to build a better future. The three key themes in this action plan are accountability and transparency, monitoring and evaluation, and student well-being. Accountability is essential to achieving equality and non-discrimination for Black students. Duty holders must shift from a process-focused to an outcome-focused result. Demonstrating committed and responsible leadership and systemic support to anti-Black racism initiatives that achieve positive outcome for students. Transparency ensures that the public can see if and how duty holders are upholding their human rights obligations. Monitoring and evaluation must focus on achieving outcomes and measurable progress in addressing anti-Black racism and discrimination. This includes collecting and analyzing data to identify and address systemic barriers, ensuring consistent oversight mechanisms to evaluate and measure the education system's performance on human rights issues, including well-being and experience of students. Students' well-being is fundamental to the successful education system. It is vital to fostering achievement and success aligned with students' interests, capacities, and ambition. Discriminatory practices undermine the well-being. They harm not just Black students, but also the entire education system and society. Systemic change must focus on creating learning environments which support Black students, rather than expecting Black students to navigate and adapt to a discriminatory environment. Many of the pressing calls for action demand immediate steps from the Ministry of Education, including creating a provincial framework to address human rights and anti-Black racism, developing a communication strategy for the accountability framework, and centralizing and standardizing data collection, analysis, and reporting. Each of the 29 calls to action sets out clear requirements to improve outcomes for Black students and educators, outcome which place human rights at the very core to ensure that Black students can learn in school environments free from racial discrimination and harassment, including anti-Black racism. Black students have equal opportunities to benefit from education system, helping them achieve their full potential to contribute to society. And Black educators and administrators work in environments free from discrimination and harassment and have equal opportunities to achieve their full professional potential. Addressing anti-Black racism is not a task for the Commission alone. This is a collective work. Everyone, every one of us, regardless of how small the contribution may be, must participate. Ontario has a long and rich history of Black leadership, community engagement, and innovation, from groundbreaking civil rights lawyers, activists, dedicated educators shaping future generations. For decades, Black leaders have founded organizations that champion social, economic, and political inclusion for Black peoples in Ontario. As part of this work, the Commission engaged extensively with Black students, community members, and educational professionals. The Commission has built on existing research and long-standing and still relevant recommendations. The Commission has heard throughout the consultation. Let me go back to that again. The actions heard throughout the consultation have been central to developing and shaping this action plan. These discussions about anti-Black racism and discrimination are not new and are not easy. Black communities have led these conversations for decades and will continue to do so as we push for lasting systemic change. We have met tireless champions whose works have already made a significant impact in education. Their efforts, often undertaken despite systemic challenges, demonstrate the power of advocacy, persistent, and community-led change. Yes, there have been positive steps, including initiatives and programs which seek to address anti-Black racism in education. It has become a refrain in speaking about racial discrimination. We have come a long way, but there is much more to do. Indeed, progress has been made, but according to Dr. George Fraser, a renowned international social activist and economist, it takes Blacks and Indigenous people about 100 years before they achieve basic freedom. It took another 100 years before they achieved meaningful elements of social justice. Change takes time, but we know every act counts, no matter how small. We know that Blacks and Indigenous people and other racialized and religious communities in Canada continue to face racism and discrimination. Without confronting the underlying systemic causes, however, lasting change will remain elusive. Real change requires dismantling the structures that perpetuate anti-Black racism in our schools. The path forward demands leadership, accountability, and an unwavering commitment to dismantling the barriers which continue to delay or disrupt the educational success of Black students for far too long. So the Commission is calling on all education duty holders with intention, purpose, and accountability to address the institutional conditions that sustain anti-Black racism and discrimination. The Commission is committed to continuing to work with all duty holders to build on progress and the work that have been done. As I close, I extend gratitude to many contributors who helped develop this action plan. I make special mention and give thanks to members of the Commission's Anti-Black Racism and Discrimination in Education Advisory Group, some of whom are here today, and the commissioners, education duty holders, including staff at the Ministry of Education, students, education subject matter experts, key informants, and stakeholders. In addition, I extend a hearty thank you to all community leaders, members and organizations of all consultations who helped mobilize engagement, shared invaluable insight, and for providing us space for these important discussions. Thank you to the members of the media who are attending today in person and online. And so I will now yield to Michael Harris, the Commission's Acting Executive Director, to share more details about the Commission's work in addressing anti-Black racism and discrimination and harassment in education.
Thank you, Chief Commissioner, and good morning, everyone. I also acknowledge and appreciate the work of our community members and others who help us develop this action plan. And through it, we can say, indeed, persistent systemic racism, anti-Black racism and discrimination exists in Ontario. The evidence of that is indisputable. Ontario's publicly funded education system serves over 2 million children and youth annually. Each of these students is entitled to an education that is free from discrimination, harassment, and racism, including anti-Black racism under the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Education Act, and other legislation. Through our consultation, we found that far too often, the burden to challenge the inequitable policies and practices that create barriers in the daily lives of Black students fall to Black people, community groups, educators, and other organizations. Over the last 2 years, the Commission has embarked on a strategy to recognize the struggles stemming from anti-Black racism and discrimination in education and develop a comprehensive plan to address it. As the Chief has said, we engage with an advisory group comprised of Black directors of education and other Black leaders from across Ontario. We held in-person consultations in Kitchener, Waterloo, Hamilton, Sudbury, Ottawa, Windsor, and the Greater Toronto Area, as well as 2 province-wide virtual sessions to hear from English and French-speaking community members, people with lived experiences, organizations, students, educators, and administrators. We also received written submissions on systemic challenges and gaps that negatively impact Black students, including the lack of data collection transparency and accountability, poor or inconsistent communication within the education sector, and neglect of Black students' well-being. In June 2023, we released the What We Heard report from a series of roundtable discussions on anti-Black racism and discrimination with students and educators. We also released a compendium of recommendations from 83 reports over, listen to this, over 7 decades that document the persistent existence and impact of anti-Black racism and discrimination on Black students, families, and communities. So today's release of Dreams Delayed is the culmination of these engagements. The action plan outlines the legal frameworks, including the Human Rights Code, that hold duty holders accountable for their legal obligation. Equal access to education is a right guaranteed under the Human Rights Code, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, and international law. As the Chief has said, we acknowledge that positive steps have been taken. We believe more work is needed. And it is all of our collective accountability to ensure that Black students receive an education free from discrimination. Dreams Delayed has 29 priority calls to action that identify those responsible for the action, specific actions to meet obligations, and timeframes for implementation, be it 1 to 2 years or 3 to 5 years. The Chief has said that the action plan focused on 3 key themes: accountability and transparency, monitoring and evaluation, and student well-being. Fundamental to a commitment of accountability and transparency is the call for all duty holders at all levels of the education system to make a clear public acknowledgement of the impact of anti-Black racism and discrimination in education and commit to taking action. The Commission also calls on the Ministry of Education to take immediate steps to create and communicate a provincial policy and impact framework with specific measures to combat anti-Black discrimination and harassment and help promote a safe and inclusive environment for Black students and educators to learn, work, and grow. Data collection. Data collection is key in establishing accountability. Thus, the Commission calls on the education system to collect and use data to measure the system's performance on human rights issues. Ultimately, it's about the well-being and capacity of our students to learn. Black students deserve a learning environment that is free from persistent systemic anti-Black racism and discrimination. The Commission calls on government ministries to improve school boards and schools' access to human rights and equality initiatives and programming, such as human rights and equity advisors, graduation coaches, and system navigators. Finally, representation matters. The Commission calls on school board and educators, school board educators and leaders to reflect the diverse demographics of Ontario and of their local communities. When students see leaders and educators who look like them, they see possibilities. They see hope. And so the Commission will continue to collaborate with the duty holders to achieve positive change, positive outcomes for Black students through these calls to action. And we welcome you in the room today and listening to join us in that collaboration as we seek to improve the lives of our Black children. As I close, I thank the Commission staff up at the front who led the development of the action plan. And I echo the Chief's acknowledgement and thank you to the many, some of you in the room, who helped us develop this action plan. And we look forward to working with you on the other side of this release. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I would now like to introduce our final speaker, Dr. Grace Camille Monroe. Dr. Monroe is the Director, Black Scholarship Institute from the Faculty of Community Service at Toronto Metropolitan University. Dr. Monroe is an applied researcher and scholar activist with over 15 years international experience in the fields of education and social development. Her overarching interest in education is to better understand the factors that contribute to quality education, optimal learning, opportunities, and outcomes for Black youth that lead to the thriving and flourishing of Black families and communities. Without further ado, Dr. Grace Camille Monroe.
Thank you very much. To Chief Commissioner Patricia DeGuerre and the team here at the Human Rights Commission, to all gathered both in person and online, I greet you in solidarity, peace, and love. It is an honor to stand before you at this very pivotal moment of the launch of Dreams Delayed, Addressing Systemic Anti-Black Racism and Discrimination in Ontario's Public Education Action Plan. A dear friend of mine who is here, Karen Murray, once shared that in the Maasai tradition of our ancestral home, when the warrior greets another, they do not ask, "How are you?" Instead, they ask, "Kasirian Ingira," and "How are the children?" It is a profound question, for it reflects the true measure of a society, not by its wealth or by its power, but by the conditions of its children. If the answer is that the children are well, it means the community is thriving. But if the children are not well, then the warriors, the elders, and the entire society must act, because a society that does not protect, nurture, and uplift its children is a society that is in crisis. So today I ask, how are our children? With a heavy heart, the children are not well. We often are told that education is the great equalizer. Yet for many Black students, education has become a site of exclusion rather than empowerment, of racial harm rather than radical possibility. The legacy of anti-Black racism in education runs deep in our system, from the segregation of Black children in Ontario's early schools to today's reality of disproportionate discipline, streaming, racial harassment, and curriculum erasure. And so we must ask ourselves, what becomes possible when education in Ontario is reimagined as a space of affirmation, empowerment, and liberation? I believe that this action plan is about reclaiming that possibility. It's a call to action that insists that Black students must be fully seen, must be fully supported, and empowered to not just thrive, but also to flourish. This work is built on the vision and activism of parents who have fought to protect their children, of students who have spoken truth to power, of educators who have risked their own careers to demand equity, and of scholars whose research leaves no room for denial. We stand on the shoulders of giants like Dr. Carl James, Karen Murray, Tana Turner, and the many others. But also I want to honor the grassroots activists, those named and unnamed, who have worked tirelessly to bring us to this moment. Now it's time for the duty bearers and the system leaders not only to listen, but now to act as their stewardship demands. Despite countless reports, studies, and recommendations, systemic anti-Black racism persists, not because of a lack of knowledge, but I believe because of a lack of will. This action plan is a blueprint. It demands mandatory anti-racism policies, transparent accountability, and a curriculum that centers the Black flourishing of our students and the hiring and retention of Black educators so that students can see themselves reflected and respected. Inaction is not neutral. It causes harm. It drives Black students and educators out of the system. And note this, it robs our communities and this province of Black brilliance, Black leadership, and Black potential. We must now therefore act with urgency and a courage that is grounded and rooted in our shared commitment to justice. I began with a question: how are our children? And today we sit in this painful truth that our children are not well. But this moment also signals a refusal to accept that reality as final. Dreams Delayed, this action plan, is more than a policy document. It's a call to action to transform pain into purpose and systemic neglect into lasting change. By committing to this plan, we affirm that the dreams and brilliance of our Black students can no longer wait. In Jamaican parlance, linger. A just education is not a dream deferred. It is a birthright and a must, and one that must be realized. In one of our students, Ube said, "I dream of using what I learn here to change a system that has tried to erase me. I want to be a part of making things better, not just for myself, but for everyone who comes after me." Let us honor this vision and act so that when we ask, how are children, our answers can be without a doubt, they are well. Let that be our legacy The work begins now. I end in peace and love. Thank you.